Okay, so are we on?
We are live, and when you're ready, call it.
Okay, so we are ready to go.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, are we on the air?
We are on the air.
That's it, the 17th of July of the year 2021. This is the Leo Zagami Show versus Studio Reykjavik with Dr. Paul Cottrell on the other side from an undisclosed location still this week. But we are broadcasting from my side on Pacific time. It's 5 minutes past the hour. And we are, of course, full of news and full of questions for Dr. Paul Cottrell, as there is a lot of medical issues this week that we will be discussing. First of all, here in LA County, as you all know, and as probably Dr. Paul Cottrell knows himself, they have ordered to mask indoors. However, Sheriff Alex Villanueva, who is LA's county sheriff, has not agreed with this masking while indoors. What's your point of view on the whole thing, on the whole squabble, Paul?
Well, I think this is just an extension of government trying to hold their mandate or power over the citizen during the crisis. The crisis is almost over in the United States in my mind. I know there's a Delta variant, but I'm not too worried about it. Now, you're going to have individuals in government that are going to want that control. I am for people taking off the mask now and living their life. Having these masks indoors, during eating, or let's say.
Oh, just a second. Can you get the mic slightly better, because it's kind of cracking on my side. I want, of course, the listeners who are tuned in now live on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network to have the best experience possible and to listen to you clearly because of the importance of what we are discussing. So let's take it from where I interrupted you.
All right. Hopefully this is better.
Yes.
But the government officials, they want to hold power and they don't want to give it up. You're seeing this at the White House level too. They continue to push on this mandate for things, even though the crisis is starting to go away. So the sheriff saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm not going to push this edict." I think that's the proper way of looking at it. Don't have the sheriff follow these government officials anymore. Actually, the sheriffs in the United States are, in a way, a backstop for our civil liberties.
So they are,
as long as they follow the Constitution.
So they are like a constitutional defenders in this case.
Yeah, exactly. Many sheriffs along, let's say, the southern border have been, on the side of border security, prevent the porosity of the border, and was on the side of Trump, not on the side of these, crazy Democratic libtards that you call them.
Well, the question now arises, why is Biden saying that this is the pandemic of the unvaccinated, and echoing what the CDC said, he's bringing up this thesis, because when you go into practice, you see that there is actually vaccinated people that are getting infected, and this has pushed some countries to readjust. And we have in the last few hours even one of the ministers in Great Britain getting infected after getting even the second jab. And we have a lot of people questioning, even in Israel, the fact that the Pfizer vaccination maybe is not really defending from the Delta variant. So why saying that, of course, this is the pandemic of the unvaccinated? This is the pandemic for everybody, it seems.
That's true. That's very true. People that have the vaccine can still get it. The severity of the infection, we have to stick with the facts, but the severity of the infection is much lower for individuals that have the vaccine versus individuals that do not. But as more and more people get antibodies in the population, no matter how they get them, we approach herd immunity, and therefore the problem doesn't become a problem anymore.
Okay,
and the developed countries are near that. We're going to have cases. We're going to have cases for the rest of our lives. It's going to be endemic. It's never going to go away, but it's not going to be the crisis that we went through.
Paul, I think what you said initially is that they want to still be in control. So I want to play to you first what the CDC said regarding this is the pandemic of the unvaccinated, and then we're going to go and listen what Joe Biden said, because with Joe Biden, of course, comes in the control of the social networks, in particular Facebook. But let's listen to what the CDC said first.
Today, Dr. Fauci and I want to provide some perspective about these numbers and how we should be thinking about where we are at this critical moment in the pandemic. There is a clear message that is coming through. This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We are seeing outbreaks of cases in parts of the country that have low vaccination coverage because unvaccinated people are at risk, and communities that are fully vaccinated are generally faring well. You can see the patterns of local outbreaks in the slide of community transmission. The blue and yellow counties have low or moderate transmission. The orange and red counties have substantial to high transmission. On the left, you can see where we were just a short month ago and compare it to where we are now on the right. In the last week, 10% of counties have moved into high transmission risk in the red, and 7% of counties have moved into substantial risk in the orange.
Now, before we go back to Dr. Paul Cottrell, I want to also play, of course, what Dr. Biden said, because now Biden is becoming himself the doctor of the nation in a way, no?
On COVID misinformation, what's your message to platforms like Facebook? They're killing people. I mean, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
So here we are, and we go back to what you said initially. They want to still keep their firm grab of into the control of people, into manipulating people to believe whatever is their own, of course, take on things. And their own take on things means they are capable now to intervene directly in social networks like Facebook. And of course, it doesn't only stop with Facebook, because Saki said in the same day that she thinks that if you are banned from Facebook, you should be banned from every other platform. Let's listen to it.
Providing for Facebook or other platforms to measure and publicly share the impact of misinformation on their platform and the audience it's reaching. Also with the public, with all of you, to create robust enforcement strategies that bridge their properties and provide transparency about rules. You shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there.
So you should be banned from the whole internet for these people. These are the real reasons why this pandemic is going on. This is the Ministry of Truth. This is basically silencing people and silencing opinions that differ from their own. Your, of course, point of view on the matter is a very important one. As we know, you are a medical student. You are also a doctor in economics. So you have, of course, an experience in both sectors. We know that this pandemic has destroyed the economy of the countries because of the never-ending lockdowns. What do you think is happening here? Because, of course, we are all worried now that the White House came out of the closet, basically, as the real censorship dictator, the one that wants to silence everybody that is sent with their own truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, they want to hold their control. There is a money aspect to this to have a third and fourth and fifth dose of updates of boosters for SARS-CoV-2. There is substantial evidence to show that there are vaccine injuries with the current vaccines for SARS-CoV-2, but not just SARS-CoV-2, for polio and for varicella and for MMR, for MMR and a lot of different vaccines. They don't want to listen to the small percentage that is getting vaccine injured, because what that will do is reopen up the 1986 Act, so there is tort law against the big pharma. See, right now they're protected. So I see this from the economic side. They're definitely, pushing, more people to take the vaccine, the more people that will comply, more money will be made. But it opens up something even larger, Leo. Dr. Barrick at the University of North Carolina was working on vaccines for influenza and HIV. If you listen to what's going on in the news, the first clinical trials for a new HIV messenger RNA vaccine. I hold still the hypothesis that Dr. Barrick's lab produced a chimera of what we call SARS-CoV-2 with an fully functional HIV spike protein. On top of, they have the HIV homology in the S protein for the coronavirus. What that means is that they have a direct line to the CD4 positive T cells. In effect, what they have done, and they've been working on this for a long time, they in effect have aerosolized AIDS. So you're going to start hearing in the news clinical trials 2 at the beginning of next year, clinical trials 3 at the beginning of 2023, and available, at a pharmacy near you, 2024, an HIV vaccine. And you're going to start hearing cases of AIDS-like syndrome. So you use the social media, clamp them down so that the centers, the ones that have some facts, can't voice their concern as they roll out not the SARS-CoV-2 vax, but the HIV vaccine. That's where this is going. So, so they're
I mean, the censorship here, it's like quite pervasive. I mean, you said they want to control, maintain themselves in control, but they want to also invade their privacy. They want to, of course, with the Democratic Party, they actually ask permission to all the various companies that supply the internet, the phone companies, entering our messaging services. And who is the White House to decide what we should say or not say? I mean, it's a complete violation of the First Amendment. So they are basically violating the First Amendment here.
I totally agree with you. And then when we go into the general election for 2024, when they have all of this infrastructure in place to do a full-blown censorship, the moment you start texting your friend, you know what, I want to vote for Trump because he's running in 2024. They're gonna plaster you as some sort of terrorist, or
Yeah, because Psaki has not really, Psaki, or however you can call her, the redhead of the White House, has not really been specific about what is her branding of misinformation. It could be anything, really. And
exactly.
And of course, the fact that Facebook is the most important platform. And now this gives, though, I must say, Trump one reason more to go on with his court case that we discussed previously on this show, his court case against the big tech that, of course, has silenced him. But now his lawyers can say, well, there is evidence here that the White House is working and colluding directly with Facebook. This is unprecedented. So, I mean, that means that the present administration has probably been, and actually there is evidence they have been working with Facebook and other social networks to censor and try to sabotage the election of 2020. We know that, but we are not allowed to say it because we are restricted in what we can say or not say. Now, changing a little bit, but not really topic, because of course we are also talking about COVID. From England, the British scientists are experimenting now a monthly vaccine in trial for those people who have the so-called long COVID, which symptoms seems to persist for months.
I think that a monthly vaccine is crazy. Because a monthly vaccine is crazy because when you're trying to induce a autoimmune disorder, there's two ways to do it. One is that you give a lot of adjuvant and a lot of antigen that you want an antibody for to the patient or the animal subject, or you have multiple doses to break tolerance. So what they're saying is that these patients seem to not hold antibodies, and so they want to produce antibodies directly. I think it's a recipe for disaster, and it'll cause an autoimmune disorder. I would not do that. I definitely would not do that.
And at the same time, always in Europe, but we can consider now probably Great Britain, not really Europe. So, well, let's say in continental Europe, they are starting to really restrict the life of their citizens, starting from France, with enormous fines if you don't comply in the use of the vaccine passport to enter even your local bar, restaurant. And basically you are a B citizen. You are not even allowed to go and purchase your food at the supermarket. This is pretty insane, I think.
I think that there's a short historical context to this that I think is important. In France, on July 14th, 2020, for Bastille Day, they gave extra income to healthcare workers. So this is a year ago to say thank you, because they're frontline workers. Literally near 1 year later, on July 12th, there is the announcement that Italy, Greece, and France are going to force their healthcare workers to mandatory vaccines for SARS-CoV-2. And so this is scary. This is where you have a government that's telling the citizens you have to do something. This goes right in line with what I was worried about early on in this crisis, is the erosion of our civil liberties across the world, but especially in the United States. We're seeing it play in real time on the news. You have, like you said, with Psaki, she can't even truly articulate what exactly disinformation, misinformation really is. We don't even know what the rules are to the playing field.
Well,
as long as you say anything against them, that's disinformation or misinformation.
Let me tell you what are the rules regarding France, because France is the first of the European states to have such a strict mandate. Italy is still discussing it, but France is implementing it right now. And I'm going to be quoting here The Guardian regarding what are these implementations. People unable to present a valid health pass risk up to 6 months in prison and a fine up to $10,000, I think $10,000, 8,500 euros. Actually, no, 10,000 euros, 8,500 pounds. According to the draft text of the law, while owners of the establishments welcoming the public who fail to check patrons, they themselves, they will risk, and this is incredible, could go to jail for a year and be hit with a 45,000 euros fine. So, I mean, we're talking here about really ruining people who are already ruined, who have already suffered the consequences of the pandemic up until now. I mean, businesses like restaurants, bars have been the ones who are hardly capable of reopening, and now you want to find them in this way. Of course, people are already queuing up for the vaccines. France has said that already 2 million have booked for the vaccine in the first 2 days of this new law that I think is taking place from this weekend onwards. But then Italy, that was initially discussing the possibility of a more mild approach, leaving out the restaurants out of the picture or bars, now it's actually discussing also to include restaurants or bars. And that also for an economy like Italy that is based on tourism, this summer will be a complete ruin, because of course people from abroad who are not vaccinated, don't have a COVID vaccination, will be limited in what they can do in a country like Italy. So we're talking here about bankrupting whole countries. But in France, we have seen also a reaction, a very heavy reaction, a reaction typical of the French people, riots in the streets. The same can be said also in Greece, where they're actually also taking a stand against this forced vaccination. And then, of course, we have even countries like Australia that we discussed in the past, have very stringent laws, and now they are rebelling to it. But I mean, will the French people be able to do a new revolution? It seems very difficult here, because they are, of course, they can throw literally shit on the car of Macron where he's passing by. They can do things like that, but will they be able to do something to change things? I mean, the European Union initially, when they discussed this green pass, they call it green pass, this vaccination passport, they said that they should respect and not discriminate the people who had made a choice that was different. But here, it seems that France is not doing that. It seems like Italy is not doing that. It seems that the countries that are jumping on board with this vaccine passport are not respecting. They are actually discriminating and forcing people into vaccinating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In terms of, will France turn a corner and move towards more civil liberties for the individual? You know, they've been, you know, these yellow vests protests have been around for a long time, but it didn't really change really the politic in the country. So, you know, the whole protesting of the yellow vests is way deeper than what was going on with this forced vaccine thing. So I don't think that the politic in France is going to change at all. I see this in the context that there is a new world order, right? The UN is trying to push more power, you know, and pass more edicts down to other countries. So think of it this way. Once a society is being told that if you do something for the benefit of society, very socialistic concept, if you do this for society by taking the vaccine, right? But if you don't, we're going to punish you. How's that any different than another law that they passed saying that humans are causing harm to the earth and therefore you have to be taxed based on your economic carbon footprint, right? So I see this as a slippery slope where it's just top-down government telling you what to do and stating that if you don't follow our edicts, you're going to cause a systemic risk to the globe, either in terms of health or in terms of, you know, overall climate or whatever their belief is. There's a larger growing of power at the uber government level here.
You know, but having said that, the organization like Amnesty International, which we usually see close to George Soros, have issued something on their website, amnesty.org, regarding Greece in particular, which I was reading, which I think our listeners and viewers need to know about. Here I'm quoting what amnesty.org says on their website. Greece authorities abusing power to trample on right to protest. Amnesty International finds Greek authorities have used the COVID-19 pandemic to violate the right to protest. Police use unlawful force, including water cannon and chemical irritants against peaceful protesters. And basically, under the guise, they're saying this, quoting the amnesty.org website, under the guise of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Greek authorities have used arbitrary arrest, blanket bans, unjustified fines, and unlawful use of force to curb peaceful protests, new research by Amnesty International has revealed. How comes now Amnesty International, that is usually in line with all this, starts to speak about their concerns? What is happening here, Paul?
I don't know. Maybe there's a rift in the organization. Maybe it's a strategic move. There's strategy and tactics. The strategy could be move left, but the tactic, the short-term tactic, because of some sort of obstacle, is to move right and left. So this may be just a tactical move, but it hasn't really changed strategy. It is odd, but maybe what it is that
we are talking about an organization, Paul, that has been boosted in their revenue, and that's what they say, by George Soros. And George Soros, is
but George Soros wants more strife, more conflict on the streets. So if you create this is what I mean by a wedge. If you start to project, the government shouldn't be dictating you if you can protest or not. And it starts to galvanize the protesters to protest against the government more. So that's what I mean by tactical move, but the strategy is the same. Create social disruption. And it will still create social disruption, right?
And take advantage. It's incredible that today Reuters published an article that in Greece, in Mykonos, which is of course a party island, #1, where you have the super rich and famous going, one of the most popular destinations in Greece, now they have banned music in restaurants, in bars, impose a nighttime curfew, and it's after a rise in new coronavirus infections. Apparently, everybody in these islands in Greece was vaccinated. Apparently, they had been subject to these vaccinations before this summer to avoid all these lockdowns, because they need the money from the tourism, especially in Greece, which is a country that has been bankrupt for years.
Mm-hmm. And this is the point that I was making. Just because you get the vaccine doesn't mean you're not going to get SARS-CoV-2. Most likely, you're going to get a very, very mild case of it, especially if a new variant is going through that area. But it still should be choice. I'm all about choice, and whatever their risk, like for them, it could be so devastating economically that they had to take it. In other cases, if you're, let's say, a healthcare worker, even though I believe in choice, certain healthcare workers may be exposed to more patients that are SARS-CoV-2 patients. If that's the case, then it's prudent for them probably to take a vaccine against SARS-CoV-2, because their risk exposure is so much higher than, let's say, the average person. But to have a blanket statement from the CDC or from Fauci to state everyone should be vaccinated, I don't think that's a prudent thing, because what happens if you have an autistic child and that autism seemed to be triggered by certain vaccines when they were younger? Well, maybe not all people should be taking the vaccine. There needs to be a category of individuals reassessing their risk and reward, and not just taking a blanket statement. The point that I'm making is that the government is making these edicts, and when you're harmed, who takes care of you? Macron isn't saying we're going to force vaccines, but if you get harmed, all your healthcare is taken care of. No, he's not saying that at all. He's just saying take the vaccine, and the small percentage that do get harmed, well, that's you're out of luck and you have to deal with it. That's not fair. That's not fair, and honestly, I think it's diabolical.
is basically playing Russian roulette with the French people, with the European people in general, who will be forced in the coming months to make a decision that will probably be a decision for the rest of their lives, that will touch them for the rest of their lives. Now, this morning, and I tell you, I live in Southern California, in Palm Springs. My wife was just walking along with the dog. She had a guy on the phone with somebody else who was saying, yeah, well, the doctor said that vertigo is one of the side effects, so it's normal if you have taken the vaccine. I mean, normal what? I mean, normal that you suddenly are affected by vertigo. And then regarding instead the fact that vaccinated people are actually still affected by positive tests for COVID-19. The British Health Secretary himself tested positive. And of course, this has gone in all the media. And his reply was, well, actually, you should vaccinate yourself because the symptoms might have been much worse. Let's hear what he said.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to update you all that I've tested positive for COVID. I was feeling a bit groggy last night, so I took a lateral flow test this morning and it's come out positive. So I'm now self-isolating at home with my family until I get the results of a PCR test. I'm grateful that I've had 2 jabs of the vaccine, and so far my symptoms are very mild. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone that's been involved in our national vaccine rollout program. Truly the best of its kind anywhere in the world. If you haven't had your jabs yet, please get out there and get them as soon as you can. And if, like me, you might feel a bit groggy, or you think you might have come into contact with someone who's positive, please also take a lateral flow test too. If everyone plays their part, you're not only protecting yourself and your loved ones, but you're also safeguarding the NHS and helping to preserve our way of life. Thank you.
Wow. So not only you have to take the vaccine, you have to also test yourself. You have to, and I must say one thing, Paul. I spoke with people who still travel around the world. And this vaccination, of course, goes along also with the testing, because you are vaccinated, but you have to also be tested. And this test costs a lot of money. And people who travel for business are forced at time to take 3-4 tests a week, and they cost money. It's becoming a business. So once these people in countries like Italy, Dubai, Egypt, and wherever around the world sees that they're making money, the medical establishment, with these tests, will they ever stop making these tests? I don't think so, because there's a lot of money involved.
Right. I agree with you. I mean, the only way that they would stop doing the testing is if it hurt their tourism. If they start seeing that even though the crisis is starting to abate and it's going away, if they start seeing their tourism still lagging and not bouncing back to pre-COVID-19 levels, then they're going to have to sit down and say, okay, we're losing tourism business. We're going to have to stop the PCR. If tourism still is flowing in, they'll cash this cow as long as it has milk, for sure. I totally agree with you on that. And then most likely the European countries, I'm willing to bet will PCR at least another year. And so in the United States, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you're traveling. My understanding on how it works for me to fly back to the United States, all right, is that I have to do a PCR 72 hours before I get on the plane, but I do not have to re-PCR in the United States. But when I flew out, I had to PCR in the United States, get on the plane, fly in, and then be quarantined and then re-PCR'd. And if I tested negative, which I did, you get out of quarantine. So for my trip at this point in time, it's 3 PCRs at about $150 at a piece. So, I mean, just to do a round trip.
So I mean, we're talking here about money. There's a lot of money involved in this vaccine, in this testing, aside from the vaccines. Going back to the vaccines, the Jerusalem Post published an article saying that Pfizer COVID vaccine significantly less effective against Delta variant. Ministers agreed to move forward with rapid home coronavirus testing as early as next week. Wow, they're going back to testing. And so here we are in Jerusalem. I mean, in Israel, the money is an important matter. So how are they going to take the fact that all this testing is coming in and that they're going to have to pay out of their own pocket?
I agree. And it'll get even worse. What's going to happen is there's going to be a QR app where you test, I don't know, every month or every 6 months, and you have to load up the results off of like some sort of code that the test kit has, and you type in that code into your app, and then now that's your kind of like go around pass. If you go in and you just show your QR code, the QR code is red and it says, okay, you're okay. And then you're going to start seeing this integration of technology, app technology and testing and vaccines. I've seen some apps where you actually have to load your vaccine card, your verification that you have a vaccine, onto governmental apps that you download to allow you to enter the country, because you start to fill out forms online and for their immigration. So one of the forms is actually proof of this vaccine. And
in many other countries in Europe, the vaccine, the so-called Green Pass, it's a phone thing. It's something you upload on your phone. So in any case, it goes through your phone. And once it's inside your phone, it's going to interconnect with everything else, no?
Right.
So then exactly. Aside from the fact of eventually they had promoted for months this app, but nobody was downloading it. Now instead, they are forced to download the vaccine passport on their phone that probably interacts just like a vaccine, like a virus COVID app, no? So I mean, it's a way of getting into of course your phone, and the people. From Italy were quite astonished this week when a bunch of children, let's say adolescents, who went on a school trip to Dubai, and they were all vaccinated, ended up now being isolated and had to postpone their re-entry, because even in Dubai, which is, by the way, the most vaccinated place in the world, things are not really working if these kids from Italy got infected and they were also vaccinated. So then I inquired a little bit, so what's going on in Dubai? Well, in Dubai, there is also a bunch of people, maybe from poor countries, Pakistan, whatever, they come into Dubai and they come in with fake basically fake results on their vaccine passports. They never probably ever took even the test. They just bought the possibility of entering the country by some kind of fake pass. So there is also this problem. There is, you think, a lot of fraudulent passes along with the whole vaccine thing, because of course, when you're starting to spend all this money, people like you, $150 has $450. But somebody who comes from a poor country in Africa, $450 is like the salary of a month. How are they going to afford it? And so exactly. Then that arises the problem that they start creating escamotage. They start finding solutions that are at times illegal, and probably endangering people much more than they would do if they were all honest about it. Now, I want to go instead in New Zealand, because in New Zealand, just like in a totally dictatorial Orwellian country, the Prime Minister said, we are the only source of truth. I mean, and it's not even the first time she says it, but now it's becoming clear that she is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and what she represents, the only source of truth. Basically, you can't listen to anybody else. You can't read any articles. They are the only source of truth.
We will share with you the most up-to-date information daily. You can trust us as a source of that information. You can also trust the Director General of Health and the Ministry of Health. For that information, do feel free to visit at any time to clarify any rumour you may hear, covid19.govt.nz. Otherwise, dismiss anything else. We will continue to be your single source of truth. We will provide information frequently. We will share everything we can, everything else you see, a grain of salt.
The single source of truth. I bow down to such great minds. I mean, here it's becoming really ridiculous, though.
Well, my litmus test for if you can trust an agency or not from the government is, especially in this crisis, they need to get up on a podium and actually tell the public at large exactly what happened with Dr. Shi and Barrick and how they made this virus. If they don't do that and explain how Fauci has so many patents that are tied to Moderna, if they don't explain why they were creating a coronavirus HIV hybrid and creating a vaccine for it, then you can't trust these people, because these are the same people that are telling you that they know all and that what their knowledge is more superior than public inquiry. So they can't be trusted, because the bottom line is this: there was a weapon that was made and it was released. And there are other weapons that are made that have not been released, but might be released in the near term. Maybe not, but they have them. And if you just listen, because we have memories of the goldfish, we have to pay attention to the stream of news that was going just before COVID, during COVID, and then now post-COVID. And there is a common theme. You're starting to hear worry about influenza and worrying about HIV. And those are the two other components that came out of Barrick's lab. That was the same lab that created the SARS-CoV-2. So, no, I can't trust them, and that's the problem. And I think does this individual that was talking, did she fully grasp the totality of what's going on? No, she doesn't fully grasp it. I get that, but the thing is that she's a sounding piece to tell the population, just listen to the government. The higher ups, like the Faucis, right? They need to actually explain to the world what they actually did, which is criminal, which is crimes against humanity, what they did. But they at least need to admit to it. And then we can figure out how to get out of this crisis. But when a government just tells you and dictates you, this is the way it's going to be, no, people are going to start to push back and say, you know what, there's something, I'm sensing something. The average person that doesn't know biology, the average person saying, I don't trust what I'm seeing by the government. Their intuition is telling them, don't trust them. There's a reason. The reasons I just explained. The government's made it. Australia, for example, was one of the first funders of Dr. Shi's research for the 2008 paper. So, and it was from the bioterrorism division out of Australia. Well, why are the bioterrorism division out of Australia funding research in Wuhan to experiment with coronaviruses? Don't you find that odd? And this, they're paying this in 2006, 2007. Why? So they can't be trusted. They can't be trusted. The governments can't be trusted.
I mean, going back to Dr. Fauci, I was pretty shocked to see this clip that I will play now, in which MSNBC basically says to the vaccine hesitant, only MAGA is with you on the wrong side of history, making it basically a complete political choice. So let's listen.
Of allergy and infectious diseases and chief medical advisor to President Joe Biden. Dr. Fauci, I'm honored to have you here with me on the program tonight. And I
also notice how they bow down, you know.
And I will tell you, when I come across people who haven't been vaccinated, they say, well, I've been okay so far. I haven't caught COVID. And right now I'm more anxious about the vaccine than I am catching COVID. What is your advice to those folks tonight?
I think they just need to look at the numbers that you just mentioned. You know, 99.5% of the people who've been hospitalized and died or died from COVID-19 are unvaccinated, and about 0.5% are among the vaccinated individuals.
Now, Dr. Paul Cottrell, do you agree with this statement of Dr. Fauci?
I believe, and I know just by looking at the data, that people that are vaccinated have a less chance of severity with the infection versus people that don't get vaccinated. There is a misnomer in what he's saying. Most of the deaths in the United States were because of mistreatment. A lot of them were at the very beginning before we even had a vaccine. All right. So that's an important piece. You know, to realize that in New York, we lost a lot of lives because of mismanagement of how to treat and what exactly was SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, all right? But it's true that if you take the vaccine, you have a less chance of getting a severe infection. If you don't get severe infection, you're not going to be hospitalized and you're not going to die, all right? So, you know, on the surface, it's true. On the surface, it's true. Okay. What he doesn't mention, which is important, is that there's over 400,000 people that have vaccine injury from SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. That's a fact in the United States. All right. I think the number in terms of deaths or complications are around 4,000, somewhere in there. I could be wrong with the number of deaths from complications to the vaccine, but in terms of vaccine injury from the vaccine, it's around over 400,000. It's closer to 450,000. So he doesn't mention that, and that's the problem that I have with Fauci. Is he tells you some facts that are mostly true, but it's important to put it in the context of the other facts that he's not mentioned, such as there are vaccine injuries. The chances of getting a vaccine injury is small, but the chances of dying from SARS-CoV-2 is also small. I mean, everyone knows that. I mean, we only had over 600,000 people that died from SARS-CoV-2 in the United States. We have we are at about 36 million people that have tested positive for SARS-CoV-2, right? We have over 300 million administered doses of the vaccine in the United States, but we only have 430,000 people that have been vaccine injured. Okay, so the bottom line is that there's low percentage of death and low percentage of harm. Okay, what would be that from the vaccine?
What kind of percentage we're talking about here? On, let's say, a number of people who have been infected and those, of course, who have died. In the meantime, I will, of course, remind our listeners as well as our viewers, this is the Leo Zagami Show versus Studio Reykjavik, our Saturday appointment, a Saturday meeting of minds between Leo Zagami and Dr. Paul Cottrell. We are 7 minutes to the hour. We are broadcasting live on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network, and the percentages we are discussing. This percent.
Yeah, it's 1.7% chance of dying from SARS-CoV-2 if you contract in the United States.
1.7%.
Yeah,
that's it.
1.7% chance.
Okay, and what kind of percentage we have of dying if we take the vaccine? Will you be able to calculate that?
Yeah.
Okay. That would be an interesting, I guess, topic for everybody who is
listening. This is percentage. 0.001. Okay. You have a less of a chance of dying from the vaccine than dying from SARS-CoV-2.
Okay, so the people would say that then means it's good to get vaccinated.
That's the problem with Fauci, is that you only look at the numbers, and the reality is it depends on your risk factors.
About infinite, between 1% and 0.1%. I mean, we're talking still about a very small percentage.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that I would, but the thing is that if you have a healthy family that doesn't have any history, primary or secondary history of autoimmune disorder or vaccine injury or autism, then I would say it's very safe to take the vaccine. If you have a history of autoimmune disorder or autism or some predisposition of that, then I would say that you have a much higher chance of being vaccine injured. Now, we didn't talk about vaccine injury percentage. We just talked about death. So if you right, so that's the more important number to look at.
Yeah.
Now for vaccine injury from SARS-CoV-2, now we're getting to 0.2%. Okay. So still, it's you from a statistical point of view, the average person, you are better off taking the vaccine than not taking the vaccine from the perspective of reducing the severity if you do contract it, and not getting harm from it. The percentage to get harm relative to what I'm saying is that it's better off to actually take the vaccine from a percentage point of view. But the thing is it's still, the main point here is that it's still based on your predisposition, because your chances of getting a vaccine injury with the predisposition is much higher than 0.1%.
But some people will say that we will be seeing the real effects of this vaccine, especially the messenger RNA vaccines, in years to come. And so
there's the problem. There's the rub, because we are now in an emergency situation with the vaccine. I totally agree with that statement. We don't know the long-term effects of the messenger RNA, and I was early out. I said that because it's unknown, I'm worried about tumor suppressor genes being turned off and oncogenes being turned on. That I'm worried about cancers popping up because of the messenger RNA platform. Because you got to remember, what was Moderna investigating before they started making vaccines? It was cancer research. They were using messenger RNA as a way to fight cancer.
Now, you hear the voice of people like Alex Jones. Right. And of course, he's been censored everywhere, because he has been warning people over and over again. Now, has he been an alarmist? Has he been somebody who said the right thing, or maybe he has exaggerated in his ways? What is your point?
I think I just proved just simple calculation that he's exaggerating the issue. Do people get harmed? Yes. Is Fauci not talking about it? Yes. Is it a low percentage to get harmed from SARS-CoV-2 for the average person? Yes. But the problem is we need to talk about the individuals that have predisposition.
But going back to the fact that in the years to come, the messenger RNA will create some substantial problems that will increase that percentage very much.
But here's the problems, because we've See, we're at a point in time, it's a hypothesis. It's not, it's a hypothesis. It's not a fact that it's going to cause injury long-term. We do know that it causes short-term injury for some people.
Okay.
But long-term injury is a hypothesis that needs to be proven out years from now, because we don't know.
Okay, but we are the critics like me would say we are experimenting on the whole of humankind, a genetic experiment, which results are unknown, and so then the actual risk that you
and that's why you're right, and that's why Fauci needs to be on stage saying, you know what, short term the data is showing that it's relatively safe for most people. True statement, but, and this is where he needs to be truthful, but because it is so new, we don't know the long-term effects. That would be being honest. And with that information, then people can make a decision and weigh the risks and benefits, short-term and long-term, to make a decision if they want the vaccine or not. But they don't want to state that. And so individuals like myself and you that state, hey, the messenger RNA hasn't been fully tested. We don't know what it will do long-term. They'll slap us with medical misinformation. It's not medical misinformation. It's medical, there's no information. You know, and that's the problem, is that Fauci's not being honest to the American public that the messenger RNA platform has not been long-term tested.
On one side, we have the Alex Jones of this world. On the other side, you have the Dr. Fauci's of this world.
Right, exactly. And that's where it's important to play the middle. You know, Fauci isn't saying anything about the vaccine injury or the long-term side effects. Alex Jones is accentuating the vaccine injury and the unknownness of the long-term messenger RNA effects. We haven't gone through that timeline yet. We just don't know. He may be right. Alex Jones might be right. He might be right, but we don't know until we get there. It's like driving into the mountains, you know, for the first time and go, you know, there may be this beautiful log cabin, you know, and then there's another guy that says, no, it's going to be a fire pit from hell, you know. You just don't know until you get up to the mountain, right? You know, so it's important to just kind of stick to the facts and just be honest to the public and just say, we don't know. That could be a problem. It may not be. Now, there is both of them, you know, what's interesting is both of them have an incentive to be the way they are. Fauci has an incentive to play only the good. Alex has an incentive to only play the bad, you know, and, you know, maybe that's a good thing because it allows, you know, people to have a dialogue and we need these types of people out there.
Up until now, because I mean, when you start hearing Saki saying we have to be removed for any platform possible and imaginable if we don't agree.
This is right. This is where Alex Jones is 100% right. Our civil liberties are being eroded, and there's tyranny that's coming down. And there's, you know, and he mentioned it in the Endgame documentary that he did years ago, which was an excellent documentary. He's right. He's 100% right about this new world order and this tyranny that's coming down. You know, where he goes a little off off the message here is when he's accentuating the deaths and accentuating the vaccine injury for SARS-CoV-2. Now, sometimes you have to scare people to wake them up. You know, there's a lot of people out there that are just sleeping. You know, they're just, you know, sleepwalking through this whole thing. So there is a benefit for someone like Alex Jones to say the things that he's saying to wake them up. You know, so there is a lot of hyperbole to just get them up, you know, wake them up. But he was 100% right with the whole erosion of our civil liberties, you know, and right after 9/11 and the conspiracy and the whitewashing and all that, he was right on with that.
Let's continue listening this interview with Dr. Fauci.
If you look at the numbers again that you just mentioned, we have a large percentage of the new infections that we're reporting every day are in those regions of the country where the vaccination rate is very, very low.
And we go back to what the CDC said. We go back to the fact that they want to continue with this pandemic of the unvaccinated, while instead it seems like that's not the case. We have at least proven that point, though, in today's show, or not, Dr. Paul?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so now we have almost an hour left to the end of this show, so we should change subject and go into the other subject of this week. Finally, the White House has condemned communism as a failed ideology. I mean, of course, we are seeing the whole of South Africa victim of communism, and we are seeing there a number of deaths now that is over 100. At the same time, we are seeing countries like Venezuela. We are seeing Cuba finally rebelling to communism. Let's see what President Biden said when he finally admitted. It took him some time, It took some time, but in the end, he admitted that communism is a failed ideology, and even socialism. Of course, that will not go very well with all the social democrats of his own party, but let's listen to this.
Mr. President, with respect to Latin America and the developments there in the last week plus,
Yes.
What are the circumstances under which you would send American troops to Haiti? That's the first question. The second question is, when it comes to Cuba, what is your current thinking on American sanctions toward Cuba and the embargo? And today your press secretary said that communism is a failed ideology. I assume that's your view. I was wondering if you could also give us your view on socialism. And then for the Chancellor, the question is, Madam, the President said that you...
Of course, I want to tell all our viewers and listeners that this question was made in front of Chancellor Angela Merkel, who, by the way, was a former Stasi spy in Eastern Germany, and so basically a complete communist. In fact, when he gave his answer, that was when Angela Merkel kind of changed expression. But let's move forward.
Oval Office as well as he does. I'm wondering if you could reflect on your exchanges with American presidents over the last 16 years, and particularly contrast the current president with his most immediate predecessor.
In 2 minutes or less. Obviously, I know why they elected you president. Well, let me start off by answering the question relative to Haiti and Cuba. And communism is a failed system, universally failed system. And I don't see socialism as a very useful substitute, but that's another story.
And that's another story, because unfortunately it's taking over his party. That's another story. It's a kind of a side story, but it's taking over his party. So maybe it's not really a side story. Cuba has demonstrated once again to the world that this perverse ideology is not really what the future should be about. Unfortunately, the younger generation, the idiotic millennials who dislike books, prefer the internet, and think that cash is some form of primitive thing. Oh, this is cash. You know, maybe they think communism is great. Your answer.
Well, I mean, I was born and raised as a Reaganite. I was my formative years, even though I was born in the 70s. My real forming of my personality was in the 80s. So I am, anti-communist, pro-Reagan type. That's why I gravitated to Trump, because I thought he was the closest thing that we had to Reagan in my lifetime. So, but, look at it in the context of what's going on with Haiti and Cuba and what's going on in South Africa now. And, there's these hotbeds that are starting to pop up, right? When you looked at the story with Haiti, it almost looked like it was a CIA operation that went awry, or Cubans are involved in all this, and people that, nonprofits in Florida. And
the killing of the president is definitely something connected to the Pentagon, because all these mercenaries were trained by the Pentagon.
Yeah, it's weird.
So these these Americans that were part of it were informers of the DEA. I mean, of course, we have some kind of interest of America in fomenting. Why?
Right.
Because apparently the president that was killed was the only one in this hemisphere to oppose a mass vaccination. That could be a hint.
Oh, maybe. You know?
So also, because the actual guy who went there to organize this whole thing, the mastermind, is himself a doctor. So, I mean, it kind of seems a little bit weird. But going back to Cuba, because we want to discuss first the failed ideology of communism, there is people like AOC and even Black Lives Matter who are blaming the embargo, that are blaming America for what is going on in Cuba, when we all know that for decades, the same problem, I mean, you only need to watch the movie Scarface to know what was going on a few decades ago with Cuba. My name is Tony Montana. I'm a political dissident.
Right, right.
I mean, just to go back in time, no, if somebody has forgot.
But, you know, to be fair, is that the United States has been trying to operate and control Cuba for a long time, you know, pre-Castro days.
And of course.
So, you know, and
I think
they failed, and Castro ended up taking charge. So, you know, it's simplistic.
Much better off like Puerto Rico standing within.
Right. But the point I'm making is it's too simplistic to say communism bad, you know, capitalism good. Even though I believe that capitalism is much better than communism. But the thing is
North Korea, there's people who are literally starving. Venezuela, there is people here at the border waiting to get in the thousands. Right. I mean, they're not. We are not lining up to go to North Korea.
What's the issue with Cuba? It's not the American influence, hegemonic influence on Cuba. They don't care if they're capitalist or communist. What they care about is whoever is in power. They are listening to the Washington consensus. The moment that they don't listen to the Washington consensus, then there starts to become operations. They don't care if it's democratic or not. The United States intelligentsia doesn't care if that country is capitalistic. They care that they follow the Washington consensus.
The truth is, okay, Cuba is a stronghold of the Jesuits. Fidel Castro, his brother, even admitted, I am a Jesuit. The Pope met with Fidel Castro a few months after that, this assertion, and he studied and Raul Castro said, I want to be a Catholic, I am a Jesuit. He said it. So these people have been brought up by this perverse ideology, which is communism, which unfortunately has a reason why it's there, especially it's popular in South America, Central America, and all these countries, because the Jesuits love communism. Let's make that clear.
I agree with that. I mean, I agree with that.
They were the ones who experimented communism in the reducciones hundreds of years ago. So, I mean, here we're talking about Cuba had extremely big interest with Obama's administration, and everything was fine when Obama was in charge. And the Pope arrived, first went to Cuba, then came to America, and it kind of like the Vatican functioned as a trade union between the two things. Everything was fine.
Well, Obama was a communist. I think Obama was a communist.
Of course, because Obama was a communist. But now that Biden is of course in charge, and he didn't really lift the restrictions that then, of course, Trump went in and put very hard, he wanted to, of course, block.
There's a reason why Biden isn't doing that. And that is that they want to create a wedge. This is the point I'm making. They're trying to put a wedge in that society in Cuba so there's an uprising. So it opens up the door for some sort of American influence in the politics there.
Dr. Cottrell, there is, of course, a reason. When you are throwing microwaves against a number of diplomats, I think 31, maybe more, who were working in Havana, and you are basically directing at them microwaves, which, by the way, are used also in China. So they probably are of Chinese origin, those kind of weapons. You are violating diplomatic rules because, of course, an embassy should not be attacked by any kind of weapons. If that was proved, actually, we should just go there and invade them, because that's, you know, an act of war in itself. So we are being kind of moderate here. Everything is moderate because of the communists, the communists, the communists. We are fed up with these communists. Let's go and invade them. I think that we will find millions of people here in the US, especially in Florida, that will just enroll tomorrow morning to go and invade Cuba, because this it's really the last country. And then Cuba is only the point of start, because then we have, unfortunately, Venezuela. But this doesn't happen. Why? Because Russia is protecting Cuba, Russia is protecting Venezuela, Russia is protecting Bolivia, together with the Vatican. Well, at this point, I mean, Russia needs to mind their own business in their own hemisphere.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the Russians, how this all started was that we were trying to project influence on the satellite countries during the Cold War. And so it was a natural progression of Russia, or Soviet Union, to try to control, you know, these islands that you're talking about that are south of Florida. You know, so there was this escalation that was going on between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This is a remnant of the Cold War, and never was settled. You know, the best way to handle Cuba is probably go in and try to establish trade where they slowly start ending up capitalistic. I think engaging these kinds of countries on an economic level seems to be more, because they'll eventually realize that if they play ball, then they'll get out of their poverty. Their society will grow, and people will start to go, you know what? I think that it's better. I mean, think about it. In the 60s, we had a major war in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, right? Well, there's trade going on between the United States and Vietnam now. So we are starting to influence that region economically, and slowly pushing back the Chinese. The Chinese are pushing back also on our efforts. So it's, the real enemy is China. That's the real enemy, not some Cold War relic with the Russians. You know, so I think that there's an orchestrated effort with these islands around us, where there's a CIA operation going on to create instability, in hope of getting a government in control that follows the Washington Consensus.
The case of Cuba is kind of justified, because, like I said, you attack a lot of diplomats with microwave energy weapons, and these people get sick. I will also implement tomorrow morning an operation to take back this island. However, I think that it's also about a failed ideology, because there is food in the island, but the people can't simply afford to buy it. It makes me really sad to see that it's a little bit of a repetition of what I noticed in the last period of the Soviet Union. And even when the Soviet Union folded, and I went into Russia in the middle of the 90s, I saw that people couldn't really afford the great things that were in the shops that much. And it was kind of sad to see that initially, no? So they had to then progress into a new phase, and with Vladimir Putin, they got away from communism into some kind of democratic dictatorship. That's what they called it. But the thing is that in reality, Russia has still a communist DNA, has still their alliance with Cuba is regarded as very important. They have themselves threatened America to intervene in any way in Cuba. Will this mean a worldwide escalation We are seeing, of course, also China with Taiwan. They have their own interests there. It's definitely an uncertain world. When it comes down,
I think Taiwan to the United States is more important than Cuba.
Taiwan is definitely more important because they are also fabricating the world's microchips, and they have definitely. Cuba is fabricating only some cigars, very nice cigars, I must say. We can all smoke them, Havana cigars. But of course, aside from the cigars, I don't think there is anything else in Cuba. Now, let's move on because we still have some news. It's 19 minutes past the hour. We are broadcasting live on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network. We will be broadcasting again next week also on Aftermath FM. Today, due to technical difficulties, we couldn't do that. And now, of course, more news from this week regarding, of course, the Cubans. We have said they're disappointed with the lack of the Biden action, but I think that they shouldn't be really disappointed because Biden himself doesn't really want to take too much of a stand aside from maybe criticizing communism. Instead, what I wanted to discuss with you is a topic that top US and European leaders have recently discussed, which is of interest because I wrote a book about it, because it's artificial intelligence. They have basically said that there needs to be a discussion of the rules of artificial intelligence because it seems like China is influencing too much the development of it, like I said in my books, by the way, and quoting what the US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said, we cannot let China write the rules of the road around the AI. And this was said at the Global Emerging Technology Summit in Washington on June 13th, event that was organized by the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. So what is your take on this?
Well, I wrote a book about artificial intelligence too. The thing is that part of my dissertation was dealing with algorithmic trading. So it's like managing the market, dynamically hedging certain asset classes. And then, so when I was starting to try to look into getting VCs to invest in some of this algorithms that I was creating for a software platform that I was developing, I went to California, to San Francisco, and was dealing with a company that was dealing with artificial intelligence startups. And, I got to meet a lot of people in that realm. All right. I didn't like any of them. They all are coming from that Singularity Institute University from Kurzweil. They all have this idea that mankind's bad, that they need to develop systems and move towards transhumanism, end life as we know it, and get uploaded into some cloud and live forever, become this digital Buddha. These kids and adults are kind of crazy. I'm a humanist. So when I wrote my book, I kind of like, I wrote it in a comparison and contrast way, which was kind of a unique way of doing it. But I started talking about Kurzweil and some other transhumanists, and then what I thought about it. So it's like a commentary of compare and contrast. The end result was this: is that there's about
in my book that I discusses artificial intelligence, which is volume 6.66, at the age of cyber science and artificial intelligence and robotics. He seems to be always a central character in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kurzweil is a big one. Like Kurzweil is a really big one. And now he's working with Google to create this mega brain, using their search engine.
The mega point, that is what basically has been picked up from the research of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, which was a known Jesuit who forecasted back in the days, because he's been dead for ages, that there would be a moment in which this central computer artificial intelligence will finally be constructed?
Well, there's two theories. There's one theory that it's like the funnel theory, where and the research was showing that the funnel theory doesn't work. But the funnel theory is that if you feed the algorithm with enough information, that some sort of there's a consciousness or there's an understanding that will evolve out of it. Okay, and then the other theory is that you slowly build these neural networks. I subscribe to the neural network, the ANNs, the artificial neural network crowd, where you just create these networks and you try to mimic how the brain is wired together. And you have these different layers of cortical tissue, like we have in most areas of the brain, we have 6 layers of neocortex, and they're specialized. Each one does something that's important. Well, you can develop these neural networks, and when you're training that neural network to do something, then you have another neural network trained to do something else, and then you have them kind of connected, and there's something that emerges, something new emerges. If you have enough of these out there in the billions, then you start to see patterns of behavior, all right, of the AI. AI can have a behavior. I've seen it, and anyone that's been doing this, in the more of the professional realm has seen this kind of like behavioral aspect to the AI. It starts to get a digital personality. That's the best way to say it. Like, for example, in trading, you have traders that long the market and short the market. Well, if you do unassisted learning on an AI in a neural network, you'll have some of them end up being long traders. You'll have some of them that will be short traders. So, and it's interesting that these neural networks, as they're starting to be trained and start to work together, how it's making decisions. It has the more connections you have, the more degrees of freedom the artificial brain will be able to do. But the computational power starts to be exponentially higher and higher that you need to be able to have these neural networks to be communicating. Our brain, even though it's packaged in a very small cavity of our skull, right? It can do amazing computational power. The average computer that you buy cannot do it. The computer can calculate quick, right? But it can't correlate and associate quick. And because of that, it's still really behind the human brain. So I subscribe to the idea that it's about neural networks and not these kind of like just funnel information into an algorithm, a machine learning algorithm, and then you'll get some sort of more understanding. It's almost like you have to let the AI create a neural network by itself empty. And then whatever the situation that the AI is in, decides to feed that information into that neural network to create some sort of correlation or to be able to train for it, for whatever it's looking for. So if it doesn't have an answer, the code would go, no answer, create new cortical tissue. And it'll open up an empty ANN, artificial neural network, small one. It's almost like you're growing a little piece of brain tissue. It'll create that empty, and then it'll start feeding information that it thinks that it's important to try to create association and correlation. And then if something that happens in that ANN, something new pops out, then what will happen is it'll say, oh, I have new knowledge. But it gets more interesting. You can in these ANNs, you can create them while they're let's say awake and sleeping. So you can create, what happens is that they're awake, okay? They're doing their thing that they were trained to do. And then you put them in sleep mode. Sleep mode is you create an empty ANN, and what it's doing is in dream state, it's mixing the knowledge it's gained throughout the day and playing with it in the empty ANN. So it's dreaming. If something comes out of the dream state that it did not have in the wake state, so consolidation, what will happen is they'll take that new information and put it into the awake ANN neural network. I don't know if you follow me, but the thing is that the point is that I have seen artificial intelligence algorithms that have a substantial number of ANNs where they were awake and they were dreaming. So the AI was dreaming.
So it arrives to a point of awareness, you think? A point of...
Well, you know, see that now we're getting into religion, and it's like, you know, does the AI know itself? I don't think we're there. I don't think that anyone is there yet.
Okay.
But if you have enough neurons similar to what we have, then most likely self-awareness will take place. Does a dog have self-awareness? I mean, like for example,
I will call it a situational awareness.
Okay. Do you think that a dog has situational awareness?
Well, in the limits of his own brain, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, do you think that a worm has situational awareness?
Well, I don't think he has much brain, but of course.
Well, it doesn't have. It only has a few neurons, but I mean, but it does have situational awareness because it's adapting to its environment.
Okay.
So you know, so the point is that maybe situational awareness is not the right context. Maybe self-awareness.
Okay.
Self-awareness, I think, is closer to what we would consider consciousness.
Okay.
So, does the dog know of self-awareness? I don't know. I don't think so. A monkey might. A primate might. But something lower than a primate, I don't think has self-awareness. So, you know, like for example, you know, my father isn't doing well. You know, he has dementia because of ischemic dementia. That's what he has. You can see that he has self-awareness, and then all of a sudden he fades out. He doesn't have self-awareness. And then he fades back in, and then fades out. So, and this is common with people that have dementia. So even a human, if you don't have enough neurons firing, right, then you may lose self-awareness. So the point I'm making is this: there's a threshold of active neurons that allows for self-awareness. Now, I kind of subscribe to that model of that the number of neurons, either artificial or biological, that are connected that will allow for the emergence of consciousness. Is there room for some sort of external force, like a godly force, that allows, you know, a soul to come in? I don't know yet. I mean, you know, I do have, you know, a religious upbringing in Judaism. So, I mean, I subscribe to the idea that we have souls, you know, so.
Now, regarding though the actual discussion that these people are having within the Global Emerging Technology, they had on the 13th of June during the Global Emerging Technology Summit in Washington, the rules, what should be the rules? Because, I mean, China can write the rules. They are at the moment the #1 nation when it comes down to investing in this technology, and they claim that by 2030 they will have the #1 artificial intelligence. But what should be the rules for diminishing the possibility that an artificial intelligence becomes then the tool of the most authoritarian regime on earth?
Well, it's that, you know, like any technology, in the wrong hands you know, it can be, you know, used against us. In the right hands, it could be used to help mankind.
It's a little
my worry is that Boston Robotics, merging it with the artificial intelligence algorithms. Okay. So you have the skeleton of the robot, and then you have the artificial algorithms that will lead to, you know, this kind of like almost Elysium kind of moment.
for those people who are watching and are listening, Boston Robotics, for those who maybe want to know what it's about, you have seen these robot dogs around patrolling the streets. That's Boston Robotics, just for those who don't know. Please continue.
Right. You know, and it's spun out of DARPA. And then Google bought Boston Robotics. So it's no coincidence that, you know, Google is investing in artificial intelligence and trying to merge artificial intelligence with Boston Robotics. I mean, that's not an accident. That's on purpose. So I'm worried about, did you see the movie Elysium?
Yeah.
The sci-fi movie. Yeah. So you had the robots that were controlling, you know, stuff on Earth, right? So, and they were like the police and stuff. We may be moving into that direction where, you know, they scan you, facial recognize, they know everything about you, and, you know, that's how they patrol the streets, you know, or RoboCop kind of.
But in that Orwellian dystopian technocratic society, man will be less and less relevant, unfortunately.
Yeah. You know, the thing is, you know, mankind tends to be very creative, especially when we're pushed into a corner. If we're near, you know, if we're near an existential threat, creativity will sparks and gets us out of that existential event. So, you know, we're a very creative species, so we'll figure a way. My writings were more like, this is going to end up into a war between what I call the monks, the humanists, versus the transhumanists. And that war, we're going to benefit because we're not so wired together. We're more biological. The transhumanists have an Achilles heel, and that is that they need energy. So we're going to say, you know what, we can shut down the grid and still live. The transhumanists are going to say they need information. They need the energy for that information.
Well, that would be
so that's their Achilles heel.
The Cyber Polygon 2020, which we discussed, by the way, also last week, took place on July 9th, 2021. And of course, the Cyber Polygon, what is the Cyber Polygon? They have simulated a possible reality, which means the complete closure of the internet by hackers, and they are the ones, by the way, that together with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, together with the World Economic Forum, the Johns Hopkins Center, conducted an event called Event 201 in October 2019, an event that was a simulation on how the world would react if a coronavirus pandemic swept across the planet. And that, of course, happened. So now they are instead experimenting on something different. What will happen if the internet closes down? That's it. Boom.
Yeah, I mean, this is also in the context on Fox News, the retired general stating that if you want to attack a nation, you want to hit them simultaneously with a cyber attack and biologics. So
this will be the next phase.
I think that this cyber assimilation and Event 201, they're one of the same thing.
Of course,
they're priming us to start thinking and stop this covert activity that's going on in the laboratories for biologics, and have direct, overt funding for biological warfare to justify what they did in 2008 to 2014 in the United States. And it's going to, even Biden talked about this, you know, during the summit. You know, he's saying new capabilities coming online in cyber and in other battlefield capabilities. You know, that's biologics. So it's not. See, people keep on thinking the new war is going to be all information. You know, and there's famous people that, you know, that have coined their company, you know, after that concept. You know, the thing is it's still kinetic. We still live in the real world, you know. The reality of the situation is that if the electricity did go down, the population would go down because we depend on, you know, our living standards, you know, are based on electricity, but there is going to be a core of individuals that still survive, right? We can get out of that crisis. Less people can get out of a crisis if it's biologics. Even less can get out of the crisis if it's nuclear. So, you know, there's different levels of extinction, or levels, you know, extinction levels of technology or weapon systems. Cyber is not on the high end of the list of extinction. You can still live if you don't have electricity. We did it in the 1700s. We'll be okay.
But, you know? But we will have the millennials that will not be able any longer to survive, because they seem to be completely connected to this technology. You have to understand, maybe our generation still will be able to arrange some kind of survival, but these people really rely way too much on technology. So
you're right, but then we have to ask the question: do they deserve to live?
No, well, when it comes down to bacteriological warfare, it has been revealed that in May in China, a human died of this deadly monkey bee virus, and it's kind of sparking concern, the whole thing. He was an old veterinarian in Beijing who was experimenting, apparently dissecting monkeys, and suddenly experienced the symptoms of this monkey bee virus, including vomiting, fever, and eventually died in hospital. The man is the first recorded case of a human becoming infected by the virus, and has sparked concern with the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. What's your take on that? Because, of course, every time there is a new thing coming out of China, we kind of like all a bit.
Wow. I mean, I didn't know about this news. Yeah, I'd have to research it more.
And
but
we have, of course, the WHO chief, we just said that we should look again into the lab theory, because finally, after censoring us, telling us that we were conspiracy theories and everything else, finally, Dr. Tedros says, oh, well, we need to go back and look at this theory, well, at where the virus originated. We own it to all the millions of people who died. He seemed to have kind of backtracked on what he said in the past.
When did this happen? This week?
The WHO statement?
No, the actual leak. This infection.
This infection, apparently he died on May 27. The news was relayed, I have it on RT today. So,
and the type of virus is the monkey
bee virus. Yeah, it's called monkey. It's a virus from a primate. So as we know, HIV, some say, was coming from monkeys, no? Don't you?
It's a herpes virus. It's a herpes virus. That's interesting. Well, here's the weird. You know, I'm just, as the information's coming to me, some of the thoughts that are popping in my mind right now. So the people that are watching, are hearing this. This is like original thought as new information's coming in. Okay, they were researching a retrovirus. Remember what I was saying earlier in the broadcast. You're going to start hearing about HIV-like or AIDS-like syndrome. When you're dealing with that, HIV is a retrovirus, all right?
But do you think that HIV was a zoonotic kind of virus?
HIV?
Yeah.
I think that HIV in the early stages was through zoonosis. Yes, it was zoonotic. I do believe that the United States specifically has modified HIV and enhanced it. So, and they've been able to do things now that are very specific through biotechnology that they couldn't do in the 60s. They couldn't do in the 50s. They couldn't do in the 70s. But they started to have the capability in the 80s and the 90s and definitely in the 2000s. So now fast forward to where we're at with SARS-CoV-2, and they were working on vaccines using coronaviruses as the vaccine vector for HIV. There's news about vaccines coming onto the market using messenger RNA for HIV. And Moderna and Barrick are a part of this vaccine program for HIV. Well, these are the same characters that are tied to the SARS-CoV-2 bioweapon. So, you know, the same characters are on this thing. You got to start questioning, you know, this is the reason why we don't trust the government, you know, when we had that earlier conversation. So my concern here is that it's a story where they'll be able to point to and say, oh, this is a lab accident that allowed for a jump to allow for AIDS-like syndrome to start happening. It's not this case that's going to cause the AIDS-like syndrome. That's not what I'm saying. But they're going to point to this and say that they're doing experimentation with primates that says that's why the jump took place.
But like Dr. Tedros said, lab accidents might happen and it's completely normal. And so we should just live with it. I mean, that was the kind of message he relayed this week. There is another interesting case in Texas, though. A guy was hospitalized with monkeypox. And monkeypox is another thing that he came from Nigeria. What do you know?
Well, now we're starting to see like there's a similar theme going on.
Yeah.
You know, there's lab accidents, lab leaks, dealing with monkeys.
Yeah. So it's kind of like
dealing with infectious agents.
We're in some kind of monkey business.
Yeah, no. But that's what I'm saying is that people think I'm crazy, just like they thought I was crazy on January 25th of 2020 when I said it was a bioweapon. All right. I'm telling you, in the news, we're going to start hearing a lot about HIV. It's about vaccines. It's about new cases. It's going to be about, you know, syndromes that are similar to AIDS. That's going to be in the news cycle for the next 3 years. And it's not going to be bam, 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 bam every day. It's going to be, they'll hit you with a little bit and then they'll back off in the news. And they'll hit you with another set of news that's tied to HIV or AIDS-like syndrome and then back off from the news. Then they'll hit you with some vaccine information about HIV going through the clinical trials and back off. So, you know what? There's a common theme with this crisis. It's HIV. This thing's moving towards getting us vaccinated for HIV type, you know, viruses. So the question though is, and this is a question for you. Do you think it's possible that they know that there's a weapon that is this HIV weapon that our enemy has and that we also have, that if released could shut down the immune system of most citizens that end up getting the bioweapon, the AIDS-like bioweapon, right?
Of course,
but the vaccine,
airborne,
right? Airborne, I'll call it airborne AIDS bioweapon. Okay, so our enemy has it, China, and we have it. Okay, let's say we made it and someone gave it to China or they stole it. Okay, but they have it also. And so they are rushing to try to have vaccines developed just in case our enemy releases it, or just in case we want to release it on our enemy and we want our population inoculated. So here's my question. Do you think that it's plausible that the vaccine program that we're starting to hear in the news with beta coronaviruses and HIV, is actually trying to convince people to take the vaccine, and the ones that don't take it will be susceptible to the bioweapon. And that they can't say it because we made the weapon, but they're hinting to say, if you don't take it, there's a high chance that if the airborne AIDS virus is released, you will die. But if you take the vaccine, you won't die. And it's trying to protect the population without telling everyone that there is an AIDS-like airborne virus. Because if you said there was an AIDS-like airborne virus, the markets would crash. Everyone would start flipping out.
Well, we have, though, this other research we discussed in the past here on this show that proves instead that the people who are vaccinated, especially in Great Britain, seems to actually be dying more from the Delta variant than people who are not vaccinated. So that is also kind of like goes the opposite direction. No? So people who are actually vaccinated seem to also suddenly have problems with their immune system. They suddenly have vertigo, like we said earlier. Or
but the UK didn't have Moderna. The UK it was AstraZeneca.
This was mostly AstraZeneca.
Right, see? And it's a different vaccine. That's the point I'm making. What are some of the themes that are coming out of the Defense Department? Moderna and the nanoferritin.
So it's also it becomes a problem here which vaccine you have taken. And I read an article this week about this couple, a doctor from Nigeria and his wife, who took the AstraZeneca vaccine, and they thought that they could go to Europe, no problem. But suddenly they discovered that now there is an AstraZeneca that comes from India and one from Europe, and the one from India is not as good as the one from Europe. So now it's like, it depends even when it's made, no? A Coca-Cola can taste different if it's made actually. I mean, like, for example, the Coca-Cola in Iceland has a unique taste because of their volcanic water. It's completely different from another kind of Coke. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have the same kind of effect. Now, here they're saying, though, that if you take this vaccine, no, it's no longer valid. You have to take the right one, which is made in Europe, because it's here that we are giving you the pass.
Yeah, but is that just bureaucracy, the European Union bureaucracy? Yeah, well, or you really think that there is a quality difference?
No, I don't think it's a quality. I think it's a political difference. I think it's a political issue here. So, I mean, whatever, it seems pretty incredible. We have 9 minutes towards the end of the show, and then we need to discuss, of course, this space race. We have seen Richard Branson. Now we're going to see Jeff Bezos. There is actually a change.org petition on not allowing Jeff Bezos back to Earth. We know that suddenly the $28 million customer who was basically the first customer of Bezos backtrack, says, no, I have things to do here on Earth. I'm too busy to go in space. And then at that point, they brought in this younger guy, very young, 18 years old, who will be the younger guy to ever go in space. He also apparently has paid, we don't know how much. But this space race, are you interested in it? What do you think?
Well, I think, when I was a kid, I was always interested in, in space and the shuttle. And I remember even Halley's Comet coming by in 86, I think it was. So I think every kid that, had some imagination of going out into space. I think a big part of the reason why I became an automotive engineer was just being interested in engineering and just space,
Amongst
people get inspired when they see these
that you have done in your life. You have also that. I mean, so you are also an engineer. But what is then the ultimate interest for these billionaires to go in space? Because at that point they will be out of the reach of any laws from Earth, free of writing their own laws in outer space.
I think part of it is that they have the money to do it. they're at a unique point in history where they'll be the first ones to do it. You know, private citizen doing it. So that there is an ego trip with that. And, you know, once you are at that level of income where you can do basically anything, create your own spaceship, they just to do it. Just just doing it is the thrill.
Is an ego trip more than an interest in
I think it's an ego trip, it's an ego trip, not so much from them to us. It's an ego trip between themselves. See, these billionaires, they're not very happy individuals usually. So they have to compete with themselves. And, so they're so close to the same income level, right? That, one guy buys a bigger boat. Well, the other guy can buy a bigger boat the next year. So, I mean, there's this, but it puts them in a totally different category when they say, well, I've been out to space.
Of course, it's not a Bugatti, it's not a Ferrari, it's something much more incredible.
Right. So, but the thing is what's interesting is that looking at all three of them, Elon Musk, he's like the NASA guy, he's the guy that, is very long-term and wants to be colonizing, the Mars, right? Bezos to me is more like low Earth orbit kind of guy. All right. And Richard Branson is like, I just want to have an airlines that I just want to have an airlines that puts you out into space and then brings you back. So he's more of the commercial guy. Right. So they're all different. They all have an important piece to this, but the average citizen isn't going to be able to afford it. But I'm more interested in what Elon Musk is doing because it's more like NASA, more engineering kind of stuff than Bezos
so after the space race, which of course we have discussed with Dr. Paul Cottrell in the last 5 minutes of our show today, we can't not discuss what Janis Yellen has said, finally recognizing that the economy will be impacted by a rapid inflation. I mean, are these people stupid or what? They are giving out trillions and suddenly they realize they're going to be hit by an inflation. Paul.
I'm very concerned about the Democratic Party pushing forward socialistic programs that we cannot pay for and issuing more debt that it's going to affect inflation.
I mean,
definitely. We're moving towards this 1970s.
I mean, when you have the Fed warning about inflation, you know that it's coming. But how bad it's going to be?
It's not going to like spike, it's going to incrementally go up, right? And then it'll start to incrementally go down. But this period of time as it's going up, that might be a 10-year event if you really look at it. Now, being the economist, on the one hand, that's bad because the cost of goods increase, right? But if you have a fixed debt, you're paying with cheaper dollars. So you're actually people that have borrowed and are paying a fixed payment. It's not adjusted. You actually are benefiting from inflation as long as, you can have some sort of cost of living adjustment, at your employment. So there are some benefits to inflation. There's drawbacks too. We're going to be less productive and there's going to be a push to move operations to lower cost centers, and we're going to lose some of the gains that we had under the Trump administration in terms of manufacturing. So our manufacturing is going to be weaker. A big part of this inflation, though, is his stance on fossil fuels. I just think that it's Biden. Biden is kind of like the analog to Carter. And Carter ran the country right into the ground in the late 70s. And that ushered in Reagan. So hopefully, he does so bad of a job as president that people wake up and want someone that's like Reagan. A Reagan-esque character comes onto the scene. Maybe it's Trump again. I don't know. but someone like Reagan that turns things around. But normally these inflationary things happen over a 10-year period.
Yeah, but all this kind of coinciding with the Great Reset, with the Green New Deal, with the will of taking off private property and making everybody dependent from the state for this universal basic income. It's kind of like they are, you know, leading the way. And now they're using, of course, catastrophes like the one in Europe, where we have seen the worst floods in decades and 1,000 people still missing, for implement the European Union. The day in which there was actually the flood starting, suddenly said, by 2035, only electric cars. So that's it, you know, and we saw that the actual car constructors were opposing this decision, but then now we have such a catastrophe, and it's like this will of forcing us into something. Could it be that this inflation goes along with all this?
Definitely, because there's going to be more constraint. Who's really preventing this new world order kind of thing? It's kind of like it's that old mentality in the United States of constitutional rights and, you know, sovereignty of the individual, right? But if you start to weaken us economically here, then people will start to be willing to buy into the socialistic agenda and get into the universal income and get, you know, buy into this idea of the nanny state.
Thank you, Paul. We have reached, of course, a 2 hours limit for this great show that we conduct every Saturday at 10 a.m. PST, 11 a.m. MT, 12 p.m. CST. Tune in every week for the Leo Zagami Show versus Studio Reykjavik, and of course purchase my books and purchase the products of Dr. Paul Cottrell on the Studio Reykjavik website. And my books, of course, you can find them linked at leozagami.com. Thank you so much.